Hi. So I had chapter 3, which was slowing the momentum for women's rights. And the main idea of this chapter was just about how women have really had to fight to get equal rights and how the media really hindered the progression of women's rights just because the media was dominated by men who didn't want women's rights to progress and to be a thing. There are several women who were really highlighted in this chapter, and two of them that really stuck out to me were Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, just because they went above and beyond in trying to get women's rights and to progress the women's rights movement, and they did things that were really crazy for that time. They created different magazines and different media outlets that were there to help women get a different perspective from the perspective of, the mainstream media. It was a male-dominated media, so the journals and the newspapers were all male-dominated, and obviously the males did not want women to receive equal rights, so they weren't writing to help progress the women's rights movement. The journalists were brutal. They called the women terrible things. It was cruel, and it was harsh, and it really did make women feel like they were less than men. The media, meaning the men, really controlled the politics. In order for women to get the equal rights that they needed the politics to change. And in order for politics to change, we needed the media to be there to help. But the media, meaning the men, they were not going to be there to support women's rights. They were the ones who, were saying that women shouldn't have equal jobs or equal rights or have equal pay. And it stems all the way back to the Declaration of Independence when it says all men are created equal, not all women are created equal. So really the politics is so heavily tied into the media that politics couldn't change unless the media changed. The media faced a lot of ethical dilemmas, as I'm sure you guys can guess during this time. They couldn't really state their opinion without being persecuted. So if someone believed something different, if a man believed that women should have equal rights, he couldn't say that without being heavily judged by other men. And so they used the teleological ethics, which was where the ends justify the means. And so they would say really terrible things about women. They would put slanderous, stories out there, pictures, slanderous things about women, just to justify the means, just to get the community on their side, and just to, because a lot of the people were scared of the persecution they would face if they spoke out and said that, women should have equal rights. And then the women's media that got started with, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they use a lot of the ethical and virtue ethics. So they were more thinking about, how can we get our stories out there, and how can we make people see that women really should have those equal rights. And so they were kind of the two medias that were colliding, and obviously the men's media was the prominent one because they just had a bigger circulation. There were a lot of ethical violations, and that just included calling women out. A lot of slurs were used against them. They were really just made to seem like they were nothing unless they were a wife. They were profane cartoons. And so there's a lot of really cruel things that were really stated about women that were violated a lot of ethical problems that most people have. Personal conscience was not met by many journalists. They were given, free speech, they were given a free voice, but they didn't really use it because they were scared about that. They did, however, provide a forum for criticism and compromise because, through the media, they were able to start conversations, and they were able to get people thinking, should women have equal rights? Should they not have equal rights? So the two medias, there was kind of the men's media and then the women's media. Even though they were clashing with one another, they were really creating a lot of conversation amongst people to see what they thought. So a modern-day media example that ties in really well is just women trying to receive equal pay. The media goes back and forth on that. There's all different sides of people, like, yes, they should receive equal pay, no, they shouldn't receive equal pay. And so it's interesting to see how women are still struggling to gain their rights and how the media still plays a huge role in that. You can see that, in my opinion, there's more of the media that's on the women's side this time, so that's been nice to see, especially compared to our reading. The media, that's how we get our news, that's how we get our information, so it's interesting to see the different biases that different media sources have on this, and that's the same thing with our reading. There are biases on different media sources. The women's journals that they started, they were obviously for equal rights, but the journals and the newspapers that were written by men, they were obviously against equal rights. So it's interesting to see how there are biases then and there are biases now. And it's interesting to see how that all plays out. So based off this reading, one of the main questions that came to mind was that we have technologically advanced in this day and age, but has the media really advanced very much? To me, it seems like the media hasn't advanced very much, because you can see that we're still a very slanderous society. We still say things that maybe we shouldn't say in the media to get attention or to get people to read things. And so I just, that was something that was really in my mind as I read, was, have we really advanced as a society with our media? I also think that you have to think about, are there things that the media should or shouldn't print, or that they should be allowed to print, or that they shouldn't be allowed to print? And so those were some of the questions that really came into my mind, and that I think we need to think about, because the media plays such a big role in our life. And I think we also just need to think about the bias that different media sources have, because that's always going to be something that we have to think about.